Usually when we look at the ruins of an ancient empire, we just we focus on the architecture.
Right, the physical stuff.
Yeah, exactly. The stone, the pyramids, the castles, the Great Wall. We look at these massive physical structures and we think, that is the shape of power.
Because you can touch it.
Right. You can photograph it. It's
Yeah.
clean. It's solid. And I mean, it's comforting in a way to think of power as something external, something built out of earth and rock that sits outside of ourselves.
Well, it is much easier to digest the history of a civilization by, say, measuring the tonnage of limestone they moved rather than
looking at the bodies.
Exactly. Rather than examining what they actually did to the bodies of the people living in the shadows of those monuments.
Right.
Yeah.
But when you step into the world of occult philosophy and the private hidden histories of the ruling class, suddenly that stone just crumbles.
The visible architecture is gone.
It's completely gone. And you realize you are looking at an architecture of power that is, well, it's biological. And it is deeply, profoundly unsettling.
Oh, absolutely.
So if you are joining us for this deep dive today, you are in for a uniquely dark, mind-expanding journey. We are going to unpack a fascinating, really terrifying historical and philosophical thesis about how the ruling classes throughout history have operated in a complete, absolute moral vacuum to achieve godlike power.
And more specifically, how that pursuit invariably turns human flesh into a raw commodity.
Yes, a literal raw material. To do this, we are synthesizing a rather extraordinary stack of sources today.
We really are. We're going to be looking closely at the historical records surrounding Dr. John Dee.
The 16th century scientist, right?
Yes, the scientist and occult advisor to Queen Elizabeth I, and we'll be looking at his original source books of Enochian magic.
Which are wild. And we are also analyzing Francis Barrett's 1801 text, The Magus.
Right, which is this massive cornerstone of occult philosophy detailing alchemy and sympathetic magic.
And finally, we're combining those magical texts with anthropological and historical accounts of elite institutionalized cannibalism.
Specifically drawing from a really fascinating study titled The Alimentary Architecture of Absolute Power.
Which, I mean, it sounds at first glance like we just grabbed a handful of random macabre historical oddities, right?
It does sound like a strange mix.
You've got a Renaissance royal astrologer talking to angels, a book of bizarre magical recipes, and then historical accounts of ancient rulers eating people.
But the underlying mechanics of all three phenomena are identical.
Right. Whether it is a ceremonial magician trying to hack the code of the universe, or a European monarch consuming powdered human skulls to cure an illness.
Or an ancient Chinese ruler serving up a dish of human flesh to test a political rival.
Exactly. The end result is exactly the same. The pursuit of absolute authority always reduces the human bodies of the lower classes, the people without power, into mere variables in a high-stakes calculation.
I think we need to establish right now for the listener that we are not just telling ghost stories here.
Right, this isn't a campfire thing.
No, not at all. We aren't just reading a catalog of ancient horrors. This is a rigorous examination of how elites construct their reality.
How they view themselves.
Exactly. We are looking at how these ruling figures viewed themselves as fundamentally, biologically, and spiritually separate from the masses.
Like they were a different species entirely.
Precisely. They perceived themselves as unconstrained by the laws of physics and, well, entirely unconstrained by human morality.
So I want to start by looking at the physical hacking of the human body before we get into the cosmic hacking of reality. Let's dive into the bizarre, very visceral world found in Francis Barrett's The Magus.
It's quite a text.
It is. When you read this text, the very first thing that jumps off the page is the chilling detachment. The human body and animal bodies, they are treated purely as chemical components in a recipe.
Just raw ingredients.
Right, and I'm hoping you can explain the mechanics of this to me, because the text talks about creating a mandrake. Now, if you grew up reading fantasy, a mandrake is a plant root that looks like a little screaming man.
Sure, the Harry Potter version of a mandrake.
Exactly. But the Magus describes generating a mandrake, essentially attempting to create artificial life using human seed or menses. It reads like a dystopian biology textbook.
It really does. But to understand what Barrett is doing in the Magus, we have to understand the paradigm of natural magic during the Renaissance and the early modern period.
Okay, set the scene for us.
So Barrett, who is compiling works from earlier occultists like Cornelius Agrippa and Paracelsus, he isn't just, throwing gross ingredients into a cauldron to see what happens.
It's not Macbeth.
Exactly, it's not a witch's brew. This is a highly systematized, clinical approach to the natural world. In their worldview, the universe is a web of invisible magnetic forces.
So they are viewing magic not as supernatural miracles, but as an unmapped branch of physics.
Precisely. They really believed the universe was interconnected through concepts of sympathy and antipathy.
Sympathy meaning like attracts like.
Yes. And central to this entire system was the concept of the mummial spirit.
The mummial spirit. That sounds so perfectly Gothic.
Well, in the Paracelsian medical tradition, the vital powers, the actual life force or the soul of a living creature, resides in its bodily fluids, primarily the blood.
Right, the blood is the life.
Exactly. And crucial to their magical theory is the idea that this vital power does not instantly vanish the moment the heart stops beating.
Oh, wow. So the life force just lingers, stays trapped in the physical matter.
Yes, especially if the death was violent, sudden, or unnatural.
Because it didn't have time to naturally dissipate.
Right. Which brings us to the recipe for the weapon salve, which is a very famous concept in occult medicine.
Oh, right, the weapon salve. I read this section in the source, and the logic is just, it's so alien.
It is very counterintuitive to modern medicine.
Completely. The premise is that if someone is stabbed or injured by a weapon, you don't treat the wound on the person's body, you treat the weapon that caused the wound.
You apply the medicine to the sword, not the soldier.
Right. And the ingredients for this medicinal salve are incredibly specific. The text says you must use the moss growing on the skull of an unburied dead man.
Yes, the asnea.
I mean, why not just moss from a rock? What is the actual mechanism they believe is happening there?
Well, it goes back to that trapped mummial spirit we just talked about. Consider the specific requirement an unburied dead man's skull.
So someone who was left out in the open.
Exactly. This is a person who has likely died violently, perhaps an executed criminal whose body was left exposed on a gibbet as a public warning.
Oh, that's grim.
Very. And because the body hasn't been given proper burial rites, and because the earth hasn't been allowed to naturally reclaim the remains, the occultists believed the spirit was restless. It was trapped within the decaying bone.
And the moss.
The moss growing on that specific skull is, in their view, literally feeding on and absorbing that trapped residual human life force.
Wow. They're treating a human soul like a lithium-ion battery.
That is the exact functional reality of the practice. By harvesting the moss, they believe they're extracting a highly concentrated dose of human vitality.
So they mix this highly charged biological material into a salve, and then what?
They apply it to the blood on the weapon. Through sympathetic magic, the idea that the blood on the sword is still magnetically linked to the blood in the wounded person's body, they believe the vitality of the unburied dead man will travel across the invisible magnetic web and heal the patient.
The detachment required to look at a human skull on a spike and think, excellent, a fresh power source, is just staggering.
It's a profound dehumanization.
It really is. But the recipes get even darker when they start weaponizing these biological properties.
Yeah.
There's a section on creating an amulet to ward off the plague.
Yes, the toad amulet.
The toad amulet. The description is pure nightmare fuel. Then you take old toads, specifically in the month of July, right during the decrease of the moon.
Astrological timing was very important.
Right. But the text describes these toads as being so full of pestilence that white worms with black heads are bursting out of their eyes.
It is a very visceral image.
It literally says the toad tries to use its little forefoot to wipe the worms away. It's so gross.
It is deeply unpleasant, yes.
And then the practitioner hangs the toads up, forces them to vomit, and reduces the dried carcass, the worms, and the ejected matter into a fine powder to be worn around the neck. I mean, how does this possibly cure a disease?
Well, it operates on the principle of cures like, which is essentially the dark mirror of sympathetic magic.
Like homeopathy, but terrifying.
Exactly. In occult philosophy, the toad was viewed as a creature of absolute venom and earth. It was believed that the toad harbored a natural hatred for mankind and actively infected its environment with poison.
Okay, so the toad is essentially the avatar of sickness.
Right. Therefore, by capturing the toad at the height of its misery and pestilence during that specific astrological window to maximize its negative energetic charge and collecting the most concentrated forms of its disease, the worms and the vomit.
The magician believes they are isolating the very essence of pestilence.
Yes.
So they are essentially trying to create an energetic vaccine.
In a sense, yes. By wearing the concentrated essence of the plague around your neck, The belief was that the amulet would act as a magnetic repellent.
Like pushing two magnets together with the same pull.
Exactly. The pestilential air of the plague sweeping through a city would encounter the hyper-concentrated pestilence of the toad amulet on your chest and be repelled by the magnetic antipathy.
It is a completely closed, rational, logical loop.
It is perfectly logical within their framework.
It is incredibly rational as long as you accept the initial, entirely insane premise that the universe is governed by toad vomit magnetism.
Well, yes, the initial premise is flawed by our standards.
But what fascinates me, and really what terrifies me, is that this weaponization of biological matter didn't stay confined to weird occult grimoires and underground alchemists.
No, it certainly did not.
It wasn't just fringe outcasts doing this. This specific philosophy jumps straight into the highest royal courts of Europe.
It did. And it was institutionalized as the highest form of medical science available to the elite.
Right. Let's pivot to the historical texts on medicinal cannibalism, because this completely shatters how we are traditionally taught European history.
It is a very overlooked chapter.
I mean, from the Renaissance all the way through the end of the 18th century, European royalty and the extreme upper classes were literally consuming what was known as corpse medicine.
The literal ingestion of human remains to preserve the royal body.
We are talking about major historical figures here. King Charles II of England, King William III, Queen Mary.
The architects of the era.
These are the monarchs who shaped the modern Western world. And they were drinking tinctures made from human blood, human fat, human bone, and powdered human skulls.
King Charles II in particular was very invested in this.
Right. He was famous for paying thousands of pounds for a specific recipe called the King's Drops.
The King's Drops, yes. A very famous concoction.
It was a distillation of powdered human skull mixed with alcohol. And he made it himself in his private laboratory, right?
He did. He was very hands-on with his alchemy.
He drank it to treat illness, to cure gout, to fend off apoplexy. He practically drank it as a daily supplement, like a vitamin.
What is crucial to recognize here is how the esoteric occult theory we just discussed in the Magus was sanitized, rebranded, and medicalized for the consumption of the ruling elite.
Rebranded is the perfect word for it.
The vital power that the underground magician tried to harness in the moss of the weapon salve is the exact same vital power the King of England is trying to consume in his drops.
So they're chasing the exact same energy.
Exactly. By drinking the powdered skull, the monarch is attempting to physically ingest the mummial spirit of the deceased. He is literally trying to fortify his own physical form by cannibalizing the life force of another human being.
And I mean, the hypocrisy of this specific era is what really gets me. Think about the timeline here. This is the height of the Age of Discovery and early colonization.
Yes, the 16th and 17th centuries.
European royals are funding expeditions across the ocean. They are encountering the Aztec Empire in the New World, and they are looking at the Aztec rituals of human sacrifice and ritual consumption. And they're pointing their fingers and screaming, "Savages."
Which was the standard colonial narrative.
Right. They use the Aztec consumption of human flesh as the ultimate moral justification for conquest, forced conversion, and genocide, claiming the indigenous people are barbaric and godless.
A justification that shaped centuries of history.
And meanwhile, back in London, the king is sitting in his palace, literally drinking a tincture made out of a human skull. How on earth did they justify that cognitive dissonance?
Well, power dictates the definition of morality. The European elites justified it through the lens of early modern science and divine right.
How does that work in their minds?
The Aztec consumption of flesh was viewed by the Europeans as a chaotic, demonic inversion of natural law because it was tied to a foreign religious pantheon. But the European consumption of flesh was framed as advanced medicine. It was categorized as the mastery of nature through alchemy.
So it's all about branding.
Essentially, yes.
If you wear a feathered headdress and eat flesh, you're a barbarian. If you wear a powdered wig and drink flesh out of a crystal vial, you're a man of science.
Furthermore, they justified it based on whose bodies were being consumed.
Oh, this is the really dark part.
The European elites weren't grinding up deceased dupes and earls to make their medicine. The bodies used for corpse medicine were almost exclusively the bodies of the abject.
The abject, that's a term from the source text. What exactly defines the abject in the context of, say, 17th century Europe?
The abject refers to those individuals who have been cast out of the social and moral order. We are talking about executed criminals, the desperately poor, beggars who died in the streets, and the unknown dead.
the People's Society threw away.
Exactly. The supply chain for corpse medicine was deeply entrenched in the penal system.
So how did that actually work practically? Like, if I'm an apothecary making the king's drops, where am I getting the skulls? Do I just go to a graveyard?
Executioners were often the primary suppliers.
Wow. The executioners had a side hustle.
They did. In many European cities, the executioner had a very lucrative side business selling the blood, fat, and bones of the condemned. Because, returning to the occult logic of the mummial spirit, the most highly prized corpses were those of young, healthy people who died sudden, violent deaths.
Because their life force was still full.
Exactly. An executed thief or murderer was perfect. Their life force hadn't been slowly drained away by old age or disease. It was suddenly, violently trapped in their body at the moment of execution.
It's an extreme dystopian supply chain. I mean, the poor are literally being harvested to keep the rich alive. It's like something out of a science fiction movie where the underclass is ground up into protein paste to feed the utopia above them.
It is the ultimate expression of biological ownership.
Explain that.
Well, the executed criminal loses all bodily autonomy, not just in life, but in death. The state dictates that they must die for their crimes, and then the elite class dictates that their physical form, their fat, their bone, their blood is simply a natural resource to be extracted.
Just mine like coal.
Right. In the Magus, practitioners of necromancy are explicitly instructed to go to execution sites or places of public slaughter. The text states they use the blood of these restless dead, perfuming the bones with eggs, milk, and honey, to draw the wandering, turbulent spirits back into a medium. The ruling class viewed the bodies of their subjects as a literal pharmacy.
But to do that, I mean, to drink the skull of a peasant to cure your gout, it requires a very specific psychological architecture.
A profound disconnect.
Yeah, you cannot view that peasant as a human being in the same way you view yourself as a human being. You have to view them as flora, as fauna, as an ingredient.
You have to view them as fundamentally a different species.
Which raises a terrifying logical progression. If the elite were willing to break the ultimate biological taboo, the consumption of human flesh to preserve their physical bodies, it's only logical they would try to break the ultimate laws of physics and reality to preserve their political power.
The ambition scales up.
Right. If a peasant's body is just an ingredient, then the laws of nature are just guidelines. And that takes us from the physical hacking of the body to the cosmic hacking of reality itself.
Which brings us to the extraordinary life and work of Dr. John Dee.
I really want to spend some time on John Dee because his story is so wild, and he is often he's completely misunderstood.
He is heavily mythologized, yes.
People picture him as some fringe lunatic living in a cave muttering to himself. But he wasn't. He was brilliant. He was one of the most educated men in Europe.
He was a true polymath.
He was lecturing on advanced Euclidean geometry in Paris at the age of 23. He possessed the largest library in Elizabethan England at his home in Mortlake.
He was essentially a national university before universities operated like that.
Exactly. He was visited by political heavyweights like Francis Bacon. He literally coined the term British Empire.
Mm.
And yet with all this incredible logic and intellect, he was trying to talk to angels. Why?
Well, Dee represents the true Renaissance man, operating at the exact center of massive conflicting historical forces. You have to understand the geopolitical anxiety of Elizabethan England.
It was a tense time.
Extremely. The Protestant Reformation had severed England from the Catholic superpower of the Hispano-Papal Empire. Spain was incredibly wealthy, deeply Catholic, and actively plotting the downfall of Queen Elizabeth.
So England was terrified.
England felt perpetually on the brink of annihilation. At the same time, the scientific revolution is just beginning to crack the foundations of traditional reality. For a mind like Dee's, there was no strict separation between mathematics, astronomy, politics, and magic.
They weren't separate disciplines yet.
Exactly. They were all just different languages used to understand the mind of God.
But the way he went about it was incredibly elaborate. The source material goes into deep detail about his setup with his scryer, Edward Kelly. Because Dee himself couldn't see the angels right. He needed a medium.
Yes. Dee acted as the recorder and the interrogator, while Edward Kelly, a man with a rather dubious past, who had actually had his ears cropped for forgery.
Wait, really? His ears were cut off?
Yes, as a punishment for forgery. Kelly was the one who gazed into the crystal or the obsidian mirror to report what the entities were saying.
The physical setup they used is just fascinating. Picture this secret room in Dee's house. They have this obsidian scrying mirror, which Dee claimed was literally handed to him by the Archangel Uriel.
A very potent artifact.
And in the center of the room is the holy table. The text describes it as being made of sweet wood, standing on an elaborate wax seal. The top of the table has a large hexagram painted on it, surrounded by an alphabet of Enochian letters painted in red on a gold background.
And we cannot forget the sigillum Dei MF.
Right, the wax seals. Explain the significance of those because they sound incredibly complex.
The sigillum Dei Ameth, or the seal of the truth of God, was a massive disc of purified beeswax. They placed one large one in the center of the table to hold the scrying stone, and four smaller ones under the legs of the table.
To isolate it.
Exactly. These seals were covered in incredibly intricate geometric patterns, heptagons, heptagrams, interlaced lines, and inscribed with the secret, true names of God and the ruling archangels.
Because names have power.
In the occult tradition, knowing the true name of an entity gives you absolute command over it. The seal was designed to create a perfectly insulated divine environment, forcing the angels to appear and answer truthfully while keeping demonic tricksters out.
And he isn't just trying to do parlor tricks or ask for winning lottery numbers here. He's trying to directly command the heavy hitters. Archangels like Michael, Uriel, Gabriel, Raphael.
The highest tier of celestial intelligence.
And his goal wasn't just abstract spiritual enlightenment, right? He was actively trying to usher in a new world order. He wanted to use this magic to cement the global supremacy of the British Empire.
Dee's angelic communications were deeply, inherently political. He was operating in a state of high geopolitical desperation. He believed the world was rapidly approaching an apocalyptic shift, a new age.
Because of the astronomical signs.
Yes, he was tracking supernovas and comets, reading them as celestial signs of massive political upheaval, and he desperately wanted Britain and his queen to be at the helm of this new world.
So he is treating ceremonial magic like a nuclear arms race.
That's a great way to put it.
He realizes England can't outbuild the Spanish Armada with just wood and cannons, so he tries to leapfrog them technologically by asking angels for the cheat codes to the universe.
That is an incredibly accurate way to frame it. He was seeking what the angels called the Loageth and later the Enochian language. Dee believed this was the actual original language of creation, the exact syllables God spoke when he said, "Let there be light."
The source code.
Exactly, the ultimate source code. In Dee's mind, if you know the language of creation, you can rewrite the program. You don't need to defeat the Spanish armies on the battlefield if you can command the archangels to alter the weather, or shift the political loyalties of foreign kings, or cure diseases at will. Magic, in Dee's hands, is the ultimate flex of absolute power.
It's an attempt to render the laws of nature, the limits of geography, and the armies of your enemies completely irrelevant.
Absolutely irrelevant.
And the angels are telling him exactly what his ego wants to hear. I mean, there's a quote in the source text where the angels are speaking through Kelly, and they say to Dee, "The world begins with thy doings."
A very seductive message.
Imagine the hubris required to hear that and believe it.
It is a statement of ultimate empowerment. It places the magician, the advisor to the sovereign, at the absolute center of cosmic history. It justifies any action, any sacrifice, because the fate of the entire world rests on his shoulders.
Okay, so John Dee is trying to hack the fabric of reality to prove absolute dominance. I want to connect this directly to the historical accounts of ancient China from our source, the alimentary architecture of absolute power.
A very sharp pivot, but a necessary one.
Because at first glance, a Chinese emperor and an Elizabethan magician have absolutely nothing in common. But there is a shocking parallel regarding the mechanics of how absolute power manifests.
They both deal in extremes.
Exactly. The source details the history of Duke Huan of Qi. According to the texts, Duke Huan was obsessed with knowing the absolute depth of his servants' loyalty.
He needed to test them.
He wanted to know that their devotion to him superseded all human instinct, all biological imperatives, all morality. So his personal cook, a man named Yi Ya, prepared a dish for the Duke to prove this loyalty.
A very infamous meal.
And that dish was his own child, a steamed baby, and Duke Huan ate it.
It's horrific.
My immediate reaction to reading this is, wait, why go to that extreme? Surely there are easier ways to test loyalty than eating a child. What does this actually accomplish for the Duke?
It accomplishes the complete annihilation of the subject's independent humanity. To understand the psychology of Duke Huan, we have to look at the concept of the moral vacuum.
The moral vacuum. Break that down.
If the Duke simply asks the cook to swear an oath, or even to die for him, that is still operating within the bounds of normal human social contracts. Soldiers die for kings all the time. But by demanding or accepting the sacrifice and consumption of the cook's own infant, The Duke forces the cook to violate the most fundamental, hardwired biological and moral taboo that exists.
He forces the cook to destroy his own biological legacy just to serve the Duke a meal.
Yes. And by eating the child, Duke Huan proves that his authority as ruler sits higher than the laws of nature, higher than the bonds of family, and higher than the concept of basic human decency.
He becomes a living god in that moment.
Yes, an untouchable force.
And this wasn't an isolated mechanism in Chinese history. The text also brings up King Zhou of the Shang dynasty.
Another ruler who utilized the same dark architecture.
King Zhou had a powerful rival named the Earl of Qi. The king suspected that the Earl might be a saint-like threat, meaning the Earl might have possessed a superior moral standing or divine mandate that could eventually challenge the king's authority.
A very dangerous threat to a tyrant.
So how does King Zhou test this? He doesn't debate him. He kills the Earl's eldest son, cooks the body into a meat stew, and serves it to the Earl.
The psychological warfare here is staggeringly cruel, but highly calculated.
Because it places the Earl in an impossible trap.
Exactly. If the Earl eats the stew knowing it is his son, he proves he is completely broken and subservient to the king's terror. If he refuses, he proves he is a rebel and gives the king an excuse to execute him.
So here is my question to you, bringing these two vastly different worlds together. Is ceremonial magic at the level John Dee was attempting, trying to command archangels to rewrite the geopolitical map, is that essentially the exact same mechanism as the emperor eating the steamed baby?
I think so, yes.
In both cases, the ruler is doing something completely unthinkable. They're either attempting to shatter the fundamental laws of physics through occult rituals, or they are shattering the deepest, most visceral human taboo through cannibalism. But the goal is identical, isn't it? To prove they are entirely above the rules that govern normal humans.
I think that is the exact thesis the sources are pointing us toward. Both the Magus commanding angels and the Emperor demanding cannibalism operate in a total moral vacuum.
They exist outside of normal reality.
They do. They are both demonstrating, in the most extreme ways imaginable, that the ruler is bound by neither human morality nor earthly limitations. The act itself, whether it's scrying with angels or eating a rival's child, is a raw, terrifying display of dominance.
And in both scenarios, human beings are reduced to less than collateral damage.
They are reduced to mere data points. In the case of King Zhou, the rival's son isn't viewed as a living, breathing person. He is a litmus test.
Just a chemical poured into a beaker.
Right. A chemical poured into a beaker to test the reaction of the father. In the case of Duke Huan, the cook's baby is merely a unit of measurement used to calculate the depth of the cook's submission. The human body is completely stripped of its humanity and turned into a metric for power.
It's exactly like the European executioners selling corpses. The executed criminal's skull was just a metric for the king's health.
Precisely. Whether it is John Dee trying to bypass the political reality of the Spanish Empire by talking to your real, or an emperor serving human flesh to test a rival, the underlying message is the same. I am not subject to the laws that govern you.
Right.
The emperor who eats the flesh and the magus who speaks the language of God have actively stepped outside the human circle.
But to do that, to treat humans as literal ingredients or as experimental data points or as batteries for magical power, it requires a very specific, sustained psychological disconnect. You can't just wake up one day and do that.
No, it is a cultivated mindset.
You have to be raised or indoctrinated to truly believe you aren't the same species as the people you are ruling.
You have to believe you are halfway to being a god.
Which takes us into the final and perhaps most disturbing section of our deep dive, the halfway to gods complex. I really want to bring the Aztec Empire into the conversation here based on our source material.
It is the ultimate historical example of this phenomenon.
Because when we talk about the consumption of human flesh in the Aztec Empire, it wasn't a bizarre secret loyalty test by one paranoid emperor like in China. And it wasn't a hidden medical tincture drunk by a king in his private laboratory like in Europe.
No, it was entirely visible.
It was a massive, public, fully institutionalized system.
It was a cornerstone of both the state apparatus and the religious cosmology.
Right. Following mass ritual sacrifices, which primarily consisted of war captives taken from neighboring tribes during what were called flowery wars, the bodies of the sacrifice were not just discarded.
We were integrated into this society.
The noble classes, the elite warriors, and the priesthood partook in banquets where they literally dined on the flesh of the captives.
Now, the anthropological analysis of this practice is deeply contested, and our source text highlights this academic friction very well.
Yeah, I noticed that. There are conflicting theories.
You have materialist theories, most notably proposed by the anthropologist Marvin Harris in the 1970s. Harris argued that from a purely ecological standpoint, the environment of the Valley of Mexico was resource scarce in terms of large domesticated herbivores.
They didn't have cows or sheep.
Exactly. Therefore, Harris suggested, the institutionalized consumption of human flesh provided an essential protein source to sustain the elite classes and the army in a protein-starved environment.
See, that theory has always sounded a bit too convenient to me.
It is very reductionist.
It reduces a massive, complex religious ritual into a simple grocery run. I mean, if they just needed calories, couldn't they have bred turkeys or dogs on a massive scale? Eating human captives seems like an incredibly inefficient and dangerous way to farm protein.
You are echoing the exact pushback that many modern anthropologists have raised against Harris's theory. While the flesh may have technically provided calories, reducing it to a nutritional necessity completely ignores the profound psychological and political realities of the act.
Right, there's so much more going on there.
The source notes that many scholars argue it was primarily a mechanism of extreme social and political control. It wasn't about the amount of food, it was about who got to eat whom.
That makes vastly more sense, given everything we've discussed today. The mechanics of power are rarely about mere survival. They're about domination.
Consider the social stratification. The mass sacrifices were public spectacles. The commoners watched the captives be sacrificed on the temples, but they did not partake in the banquets.
So they were excluded from the consumption.
Only the nobility, the victorious warriors, and the priests consumed the flesh. In the Aztec cosmology, blood and the human heart contained tonali, a divine animating life force provided by the gods.
So they are eating the divine spark.
By sacrificing the captive, they return that energy to the sun to keep the universe from collapsing. But by consuming the remaining flesh, what does that do to the psychology of the noble?
By consuming the life force of their enemies, the Aztec nobility weren't just feeding their physical bodies, they were physically internalizing their political dominance.
The ritual elevated them.
It elevated them above the commoners who only got to watch, and it elevated them infinitely above the captives who were literally being digested. The elite became beings who were halfway to being gods.
Exactly. It cemented a biological hierarchy. The elite are the consumers. The conquered are the consumed.
I love that phrasing, the halfway to gods complex,
Yeah.
because we can link this complex directly back to the occult philosophies of John Dee and Francis Barrett.
There is a very strong philosophical resonance there.
The ceremonial magicians and the Aztec emperors are speaking the exact same psychological language, just using different vocabularies.
How do you see those texts mapping onto each other so directly?
Well, look at the philosophy underpinning Dee's angelic conversations. In his diaries, the angels explicitly and repeatedly tell Dee and Kelly that flesh is vile and corrupt.
Yes, a constant theme in the Enochian workings.
They are reinforcing an ancient, deeply Gnostic view of the universe. In Gnosticism, the physical material world is considered inherently base, dirty, a prison created by a lesser god.
The true divine spark is trapped inside this meat suit.
Right. And by extension, the common people, the peasants who toil in the dirt, who sweat, who breed, who die of mundane diseases, are entirely trapped in that corrupt physical world.
They are of the earth.
They are base and worthless compared to the spiritual enlightenment of the Magus, who is trying to escape the physical realm entirely.
The magician is actively seeking to shed the corrupt flesh to achieve a higher spiritual resonance.
Yes. And Francis Barrett's The Magus echoes this perfectly. The text explicitly states that through the mastery of natural and ceremonial magic, the true magician transcends the progress of angels and comes to the very archetype himself.
They literally believe they are becoming divine.
They are ascending past the angels to sit beside the Creator.
It is the ultimate ascension, and if you genuinely believe you are ascending to godhood, the concerns of the mortal beings left below you become vanishingly small. Their suffering does not register on your moral radar.
It feels like the ultimate God complex. Like, if I can invent an analogy here, it is as if the elite view reality like a massive multiplayer video game.
Okay, I follow.
But in their minds, they're the only actual players. They have agency, they have a destiny, they're communicating directly with the developers, the angels, to get the cheat codes to rewrite the map.
And the rest of humanity.
The peasants, the criminals, the conquered captives, the cook's baby, they are just NPCs, non-player characters. They are background code.
That is a chilling comparison.
And if you are a player and you need to consume an NPC for a health boost, whether that's an Aztec noble eating a captive to internalize divine power, or King Charles drinking powdered skulls to cure his gout, or an emperor eating a child to test a loyalty metric, you do it without a second thought.
You don't feel guilty about using a health potion in a video game.
Exactly. You don't hold a funeral for the pixels you just consumed.
That is a remarkably accurate analogy for the amoral elite, because it perfectly captures the lack of moral friction. When you kill an NPC or when you harvest a peasant, it's not murder, it's not a sin, it is simply resource management.
Resource management. Wow. That is the darkest possible framing, but it fits the history perfectly.
And if we tie all these disparate themes together, we see the justification of this commodification clearly. Whether we are looking at historical magi like Apollonius of Tyana, who is referenced in these occult texts as possessing rings of power that allowed him to live for over 100 years.
A literal magic ring of long life.
Right. Whether we are looking at him or whether we are looking at Aztec emperors or European monarchs, the ruling classes viewed themselves as a fundamentally different, elevated tier of existence.
They weren't just sitting at the peak of the social pyramid, they believed they were floating above it entirely.
Because their survival, their health, their political supremacy, and their spiritual enlightenment were deemed universally paramount.
Everything hinged on them.
In their worldview, if the king dies, the state collapses into chaos. If the Magus fails to hack the universe, the new apocalyptic age doesn't dawn, and England falls to Spain. If the Aztec priest doesn't offer the blood, the sun literally stops moving and the universe ends.
The stakes are cosmic.
Therefore, any action taken against the abject, the conquered peoples, or the rival's family was entirely justified by those cosmic stakes. The masses were merely the fuel required for the elite's divine ascent.
The fuel. And it didn't matter if that fuel was burning the residual life force out of the moss on an unburied skull, or grinding up a warm corpse from the executioner's lock, or serving a child at a banquet.
The amoral elite operates on the principle that the ends not only justify the means, but that the means, the physical bodies of the lower classes, have absolutely no intrinsic value of their own until they are utilized by the elite.
We have covered some truly massive dark historical territory today. Let's try to summarize the key takeaways from this deep dive, pulling all these threads into a final picture for the listener.
A good idea to synthesize everything.
We started with a terrifying but historically supported thesis. The pursuit of absolute authority invariably turns human beings into commodities. We are talking about cosmic hackers and the literal commodification of flesh.
And we trace the mechanics of that commodification through three distinct but deeply interconnected historical phenomena.
First, we looked at the bizarre, visceral recipes of sympathetic magic in texts like the Magus and the real-world application of corpse medicine in Europe.
Right.
We saw how European royals literally drank the powdered skulls and blood of executed criminals to cure their own ailments and extend their lives, treating the human soul, the trapped mummial spirit, as a medicinal battery, all while hypocritically calling the cultures across the ocean barbaric for doing the same thing.
Second, we examined the geopolitical angelic hacking of John Dee.
Which is just mind-blowing.
We saw how ceremonial magic wasn't just mystical escapism, it was a desperate political tool to rewrite reality and establish empire. And we discussed how this operates in the exact same moral vacuum as ancient Chinese emperors who used the consumption of human flesh, like Du Quan's steamed baby or King Zhou's rival's son, as a raw metric to test loyalty and assert absolute dominance over the laws of nature.
And third, we looked at the institutionalized consumption of flesh in the Aztec Empire. We saw how it functioned as a mechanism of extreme social control, cementing a biological hierarchy.
Very effectively, I might add.
We connected that to the occult Gnostic belief that the physical flesh is corrupt and that the magician transcends the angels. It all points to this halfway to God's complex, the elite viewing themselves as the only actual players in reality and the rest of humanity as NPCs, to be harvested for health boosts and political power.
If there is a final synthesis to draw from all of this history, it is that power, when pushed to its absolute limits, specializes in the commodification of the subject. The preservation of the ruler's office, or their bloodline, or their empire, or their spiritual ascension, always, inevitably, outweighs the humanity of the ruled.
The visible architecture of power, whether the castles we tour on vacation, the walls, the stone pyramids, is just the shell. The real architecture of absolute power is biological. It is built on the bones, the blood, and the literal life force of the abject.
It is an alimentary architecture. It consumes the lower classes in order to grow.
Which leaves us with a final, haunting question for you to mull over as we wrap up today. We look back at these histories and we feel a sense of distance, right? We don't see kings drinking powdered skulls from crystal vials today.
Fortunately not.
We don't see rulers serving steamed babies at state dinners to test their cabinet members.
Nope.
But the underlying architecture of power, that fundamental idea that the elite can harvest the time, the data, the attention, and the literal physical labor of the abject to extend their own lives, multiply their own fortunes, and build their own empires, that hasn't vanished.
It hasn't vanished at all.
It has just evolved. The extraction is cleaner now. It's digital. It's economic. It's systemic. The blood is removed from the equation, but the extraction of vitality remains. So as you look at the modern world, ask yourself, what is the 21st century equivalent of corpse medicine, and who is currently being harvested?
A question that demands rigorous, critical consideration from all of us.
Thank you for joining us at the table today on this dark but illuminating journey into the architecture of power. Keep digging.